Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. It's a great privilege for me to be here. One of the questions that I asked myself as I made my way over here, trying to sleep on the airplane, was, what am I doing here? Right? I mean, really, what am I doing here? Why am I here? You know, this is a place of great prestige, where renowned speakers come, people from around the world. So why me? You know, I spent a lot of my life, as Charlie mentioned, what I'm doing now, I spent a lot of my life as a lawyer, fighting for, lack of a better description, the little guy against powerful forces. And then I got involved in politics. And I decided, well, you know, I kind of want to be a member of the club. You know, the people who have power, the people who can actually have more influence over what happens in the world. And so I ran for office. I ran for the U.S. Senate. I was elected to the U.S. Senate. When I got to the Senate, I decided I wanted to run for president. And I ran for president. As Charlie mentioned, I ran twice. I ran in 2004, unsuccessfully. I was really good at running unsuccessfully for president. And then I ran as vice president with John Kerry as the Democratic nominee in 2004. And then in 2008, I ran for president again. So I spent a lot of time, about a decade of my life, actually, sort of, I guess, trying to be in the club that has power and influence. You know, one of the things that I suspect we'll talk about today when I'm finished is Uzbekistan and other issues around the world and what we're going to do about them. Well, now here's the truth. I don't have any political power. I just don't. I don't have any more political power than you do. I mean, I'm just a private citizen practicing law now. And one of the things that I figured out, you know, we all go through, there's no one in this room who hasn't been through a journey that led you to this place where you are today. And a lot of the people who come here to speak have been through, not a lot of them, all of them, have been through their own life journey. What got them here? Well, here was my journey. My journey was from coming from a regular working family, finally becoming a lawyer, being pretty decent at being a lawyer, and then spending a lot of years trying to be part of the power club. And one of the things I figured out about that through my journey, my personal journey, was to be in that club, there's a lot of people who control, voters for example, whether you get there and whether you stay there, who want you to be perfect, right? So you spend a lot of your time trying to be what they want you to be. Well, I'm not perfect. I'm a long way from perfect. And I suspect I don't have to tell a single person in this room that that's true. You know it. I am a flawed human being. And before I ever ran for any office, I spent my life fighting for the forgotten souls that nobody speaks for, that don't have any voice. And it's a great honor for me to be here, particularly now, because I honestly think I'm where I'm supposed to be. You know, I don't think it's an accident. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Because I want to be speaking for the forgotten. That's what my life is about. I think that's why I'm here. I think that's why I was here when I was a lawyer, and I spent some time in politics, which I enjoy. I've had an amazing life experience. And the politics exposed the frailties and flaws that I have as a human being in a very public way, which I had to live through. But there are so many people, not just in the United States, which I'm going to talk about some, but across the world, who desperately need somebody to speak for them, who need a voice, who have no voice. One thing I want to say before I get to that is I'm going to talk about the poor and poverty, because it's a deep passion of mine, has been for a long time. I am not an academic and don't claim to be. I don't claim to have the depth of policy, research, statistical experience that many people have. I've read the writings and listened to the talks of people who do that kind of work. One is actually from here, Paul Collier, who wrote The Bottom Billion, brilliant guy, great book. Jeff Sachs, who is an economist at the United Nations, whose work I admire tremendously. And then there's this guy, that's me. But I didn't write this book. I edited it. I edited it along with a couple other people. And it has some of the best people in the United States talking about poverty in the United States. But my point is, I'm not an academic and don't claim to be. So when we get into this issue, I'll tell you what I think, I'll tell you what I've seen, I'll tell you what I feel. But that's really what you're going to get. Because most of the other, I'm not an original thinker about these policy ideas, what needs to be done, what caused and continues to cause poverty across the world. So who are the kind of people that I want to speak for, that I want to advocate for? A few years ago, I was in Haiti. This is before the earthquake. And we were in Port-au-Prince. Some of you know Port-au-Prince, the biggest city in Haiti. And Port-au-Prince has a slum called the Cité Soleil. The Cité Soleil is one of the worst slums, I'm told, in the world. And we spent a day with an amazing man named Father Rick, who's a Catholic priest there, who ministers, I don't mean religiously, I mean he ministers, helps, educates, provides health care, food for people who live in the Cité Soleil. And the Cité Soleil has no governance, essentially. Police don't go in there, the government doesn't go in there, it's run by gangs. And it's enormous. Last I heard it was 700,000 people, so it's a lot. So we spent the day going to schools, meeting with people, meeting with families, seeing what their lives were like. As we were about to leave, I remember it was almost dark. It was hot, so the windows were rolled down. I was being driven by somebody else. I was in the front seat in a truck. We stopped, and this lady came over to where I was sitting and started screaming and crying. And she had two young children. I can't remember exactly how old they were, but 3, 5, somewhere in that neighborhood. She was holding them in her arms, and she was speaking to me. And I don't know, French maybe? I don't know what language she was speaking. Whatever language she was speaking, I didn't understand it. And I had no idea what she was saying. And to begin with, she was just talking and getting louder and louder and louder. And finally, and the guy who's driving the truck was gone. So I was sitting there by myself. He finally came back, got in the truck. He was from there. And I said, this lady's been screaming at me now for 5 minutes and I've been crying, and I don't understand what this is about. What is happening? And he conversed with her for a second, listened to her, and he looked at me and he said, she wants you to take her children. And I said, what? He said, she wants you to take her children. Take them with you. And I said, she doesn't even know me. And he said, but she believes that if you take her children, they'll have a better life than they can have here with their mother. Think about the level of hopelessness that's necessary for a mother who loves her children, which is clear this woman did, to feel in order to offer her children to strangers. Who speaks for her? You know, we can talk about the bottom billion. You know, we can talk about masses of people. Needs to be done because they are in masses. There are huge numbers. But who speaks for the men and women like this woman I saw in the Cité Soleil? Who speaks for them? That's what I've made a lot of mistakes, very public ones. And what I want to do is spend the rest of my life trying to make up for those mistakes by speaking for people like this, by speaking for the forgotten. And I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher, but I know what I feel in here, and I know what I felt that day, that night, when I met that woman. And she needs somebody. She's not by herself. They're everywhere. They're all over the place. And you know, if you look at the big picture, it's not, for the most part, certainly not in the United States, it's not getting better. I mean, the World Economic Forum has identified all the things you'd expect them to identify. You know, that are the big challenges facing the world. Climate change, population growth, technology, economic crises, all the kind of things that you would expect. And there are, I think, heroes, extraordinary people out there speaking to a lot of these issues. People like Al Gore, who's brought climate change to, from my perspective, a different level, especially speaking about it when really no one else was. I mean, I admire him and I admire his work and his voice enormously. President Clinton, his foundation, what they've done with respect to Africa, the issue of AIDS, the issue of women and women empowerment. Huge difference, huge difference. Rock stars, Bono, who I happen to know a little bit, has done the same thing. The Gates, you know, who through ingenuity and good luck got wealthy, have decided to spend a great deal of their wealth helping kids and on issues like education. So there are people out there doing this. And there are great thinkers who I admire and respect, including the two that I mentioned today, one from here and Jeff Sachs, who's from the United Nations. So there are lots of people out there thinking and working on this, but these folks need a voice. They need to be heard. They do desperately need to be heard. And if you think about, you know, I've been listening and watching this debate about the Ukraine and what's going on there, what's Russia doing, what's their motivation, what are the geopolitical politics, how does it relate to the United States, you know, how is Putin ignoring what Obama's saying, what's Europe doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not suggesting that's not an important issue. It's very important to those folks and it's very important to the countries involved and should be treated that way. But to me, it's a great example of a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is when you look at what mankind, I'm not talking about countries, I'm not talking about nation states. When you look at what mankind is faced with, the big issues, extreme poverty, climate change, population growth in places that cannot, under any circumstances, sustain it. When you look at those big issues, there is no country, including mine, that has the money or the power to fix it. It cannot be done. It can only be done through cooperation. And when we talk about how we, you know, what are the policy changes? What does the IMF need to do? Whatever global institutions we're discussing, the United Nations, whatever we're talking about. And then we talk about the political realities of how America interacts with China, Russia, the United Kingdom, anywhere else. The most important thing, if you don't hear anything else I say today, the most important thing, and I'm going to get to your role in this in a second, the most important thing is there going to be a cooperative effort? Because this question is not about, you know, how is my life going to be in 10 years? How wealthy am I going to be? How poor am I going to be? How, you know, what level of education am I going to have? This is about whether we're going to exist. That's what this is about. Because if we don't address these huge, I'm not talking about small issues, I'm talking about huge issues, all of which are interrelated. Extreme poverty, you know, 1 out of 2 children in the world live in poverty. 1 out of 2. Do we think that's only about them? You know, I live in a big house in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Do I think it doesn't matter that this mother who wanted to give me her children in Haiti is worried about the next 12 hours and whether she can feed those children? And it doesn't matter to me, except that I feel guilty and I feel like I need to help her. Does it matter to me that we have 3 billion people who live on $2.50 or less a day? I paid more than $2.50 for my French fries at the hotel. I mean, really? How do we live with ourselves? I'm not talking about guilt. I'm talking about these issues cannot be solved by a political leader or by a country. It cannot happen. Cooperation is the single most, if we're looking for visionary leadership, and I'm looking for it, if we're looking for visionary leadership in this world, we need the kind of leadership that recognizes over the next 50 to 100 years, if we don't work together, all of us, to solve this problem, we're talking about whether this place in mankind is going to continue to exist. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about little things. We're talking about big things. And you all know, without me even going through it, so I'm going to do it lightly, you know damage to ecosystems. You know, the population in the world has gone from, I'm doing this from memory, but somewhere around 2.5 billion people to almost 7 billion people in the last 50 years. Now think about that. So that means in the last 50 years, the world's population has grown more than the previous existence of humanity. And what does that mean? It means in a lot of places there's not enough food, there's not enough water. And think about the extraordinary damage, we see it all the time, that's being done to the ecosystems. Everywhere. That many people take up so much more. It's just, that part's fairly simple. The solutions are much more complicated. But that part's pretty simple. And the population continues to grow, and the population particularly continues to grow in the places that absolutely cannot support it. Relatively stable in the United States, in Europe, actually relatively stable in most of Asia, but not in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, it's going through the roof. We have so much to do and so much to do together. The damage to the environment, global warming, polar ice caps melting, water temperatures rising, not adequate access to drinking water, not adequate food production. Again, particularly where the bottom billion live. We have to do, these are all issues that we have to deal with together. Can't be done by one person, can't be done by one leader, can't be done by one country. It is such an important concept. And to recognize the tension that exists between that idea. It sounds really simple. Sure, of course we need to cooperate, sure. But nationhood, pride in nation, pride in people, you know? I'm British, I'm American, I come from a great country. We do great things, we are creative, we are innovative, we lead the world. Well, the rest of that world will continue to exist when we treat them with respect and cooperate with them. We cannot power our way through this. And we can't spend our way through it. It's really pretty simple. Now, how does that, what's happening with the world, jive with what's happening in my country, which I know much more about? You know, some of y'all may remember that when I ran for president, I talked about something called the two Americas. You know, one America for people who had everything, which included me, and then one for basically everybody else. People who have to struggle just to survive, you know? And those two Americas still exist as I stand here today. Poverty is the worst it has been in the United States for the last 50 years. It's getting worse. And there are people speaking to it. There are. The president and others are talking about it, talking about what we need to do. But the divide is real. And I'll tell you, I talked to you a minute ago about what my own personal experience was with what's happening in the world and extreme poverty. This is where my drive comes from on Two Americas. It didn't come out of nowhere. When I was young, I grew up in a family where my parents didn't have a lot of education. They both graduated from high school. But I saw my father, who I loved more than anything in the world, treated with, because he had no power, no money, and little education. I saw him treated with disrespect because of that. And that observation and that feeling that I had, feeling badly for him, feeling badly for the way he was being treated, honestly, it raged inside me, still does to some extent, but particularly when I was younger, in a very real and meaningful way. You know, some would call it the rage of class, but for whatever reason, I felt it, and I felt it in a very real and personal way. And it is one of the reasons that even though poverty was largely not in the political dialogue, you know, for the most part, poor people don't vote, they sure don't give money to candidates, and it's not a very popular political issue. You know, polls make that very, very clear. But the reality is, if you speak about something you really believe, and it rings true, now I am talking about politics, and it rings true, it works. And that's what happened. I don't know if any of you remember this, probably had real lives and weren't thinking about it. But back when I was running for president in 2004, I was way behind, don't remember, 5th, 6th place, something, running in the primaries. And I began to talk about this idea of Two Americas and to speak about it from within and from my heart. And all of a sudden, I started climbing. I had more support, better chance, still managed not to win. But I did do better. And I think the simple reason for that is I really don't think it's that complicated. I think people saw that I felt it, that it was passionate, and singly, the most important thing, it was the truth. And they knew it. All I was doing was voicing what they already knew to be true. So we are still in that place. You know, Two Americas hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. So what are the kind of things that we ought to do about it? I'll never forget, I was down in, you all know about Hurricane Katrina and hitting New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. I was down in the Gulf Coast doing some work not long after the hurricane hit. And I was in a shelter where people who'd lost their houses were living. And there was a guy there. I was just walking around talking to people, and I asked him how he's doing. He said he was doing okay, and I said, well, you know, what are you going to do to support yourself? How are you going to support yourself and your family? And I still remember this vividly. I remember where we were standing. And he said, well, here's what I do. I get up every morning. I go out in front of it was a big, what do you call it, a gymnasium, I guess. There were a lot of cots, and people were sleeping on cots on the floor. He said, I go out front, and he said, and sometimes, if you're out there by 5 in the morning, people will come by and pick up trucks, pick you up, and put you to work, and pay you for it. And he said, if I can do that, I can start supporting my family again. Now, at the risk of being purely American for a second, to me that is the definition of the American work ethic. It's the definition of anybody's work ethic. This is a guy who just lost everything. He's living on a cot in a gymnasium with his kids, and he's trying to figure out a way to go back to work. So the question for me becomes, how do we make work work? How do we make it pay for people again? And there are a bunch of things. I won't go through them all in detail, but things like raising the minimum wage. I am a union proponent. I have been for many years. Strong supporter. I know the arguments on the other side. I don't agree with them, but we can talk about it in a few minutes if you want to. But I do believe unionization can make a difference. Things like the earned income tax credit can allow people who are living that life to earn a better living. I mean, there are a whole variety of substantive policy things that you can do that really help people. But it wasn't just my experience with my father that made me want to do something about this. I went, I guess, probably over 200 places around the United States, various forms of poverty centers, places where they were trying to help people who were living in poverty. And if you've done this, you know the same thing I'm about to tell you. If you don't, let me tell you what I saw. This is what I saw. You couldn't find a man with a radar. Honest to goodness. I mean, you go in those places, it's all women. It's women and it's children. The fathers are gone. The women are trying to support their children and will do virtually anything to work, to find a safe shelter for them, to try to feed their kids. But it is, in real life, the definition of what these people are living through. These mothers don't leave their children. They stay with them. And they do everything in their power. If you have anybody has any, I don't think anybody in this room does, anybody has any issues respecting women, follow me around for a little bit doing this. That'll go away. It'll go away fast. So what are the other kinds of things we can do? We can help them with their work, help them make more money, right? For goodness sakes, can we please, in the United States, in my country, stop lowering and eliminating taxes on wealth and raising taxes on work? It's insane. I mean, really. I mean, I understand all the arguments of the entrepreneurs and the investors. I get it. I fit more in their category than any other one, but I think they're just dead wrong. Eliminating the capital gains tax, etc., doesn't make any sense. And raising the taxes on people, effectively raising the taxes on people who live by their own work, makes no sense. It just doesn't make any sense. And what about assets? It's not just income, it's assets. They don't have any assets. They don't have any. Millions and millions of Americans have no bank account. They don't have any savings. They don't have anything whatsoever to fall back on if something goes wrong. And just think to yourself, just in your family, how many times has something gone wrong? It happens all the time. It happens to all of us. But people like me, I've got something to go back to. I've got something we can take care of. If something goes wrong, we're okay. But if you got no bank account, you got no savings, and you're just barely feeding your children, and you're a single mother, and something goes wrong, you are in the ditch. And it's very, very hard to get out of that ditch. So, there's a lot we can do. We can do something about savings. Young African American men, this is not a subject I claim to be expert on, but people like William Julius Wilson, who's at Harvard and wrote a piece in this book that I edited, have spent their lives studying it. They're just removed, essentially, from society. It's why they have high unemployment, low graduation rates from high school. It's why, in many cases, they don't feel capable of supporting their children. It's why they resort to drugs. They can't get out of their neighborhoods. Another huge issue is housing and the need for expanding what's called Section 8 housing vouchers so that people can have a choice about where they live and have a decent place to live in the United States. There's a lot to do. Our education system, I mean, our education system, the difference, first of all, between private and public education is dramatic. It just is, in real life. And then trying to make our public education system work the way it needs to work, the way we pay teachers is an abomination. It really is. We don't pay teachers well. We don't attract them to the places that we need them the worst. We don't make a meaningful effort to reform our schools. The schools that aren't working, we don't have second chance schools for kids who drop out. There's a whole preschools that really work and get kids ready to go to school. The expansion of Pell Grants so kids can really go to college. I mean, it sounds like a laundry list, but there's not a single one of these things that don't affect thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. So, we still live in two Americas, but we can do something about it. If we really want to, we can do something about it. So, before I finish, and then we'll start taking, we'll take questions. I wanted to say a couple of things. One is, I said at the beginning, I am not an academic. I am an adversary. I'm a fighter. I'm somebody who wants to give voice to people who need voice. But I admire those who've done so much work, like Jeff Sachs, like Professor Collier, many others. There are many others. Jacob Hacker, Senator Warren, who's now in the United States Senate, but who was an academic before that. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I admire these people because they've done extraordinary things and they've developed great ideas about what needs to be done. Some of them are different. I'm not sure I'm the best judge of what's right and what's wrong. But we need people doing that kind of work. We need it very badly. But here's the bottom line. Nothing will change. Nothing will change without you. I mean, what I have seen is public opinion has to change. People have to really care. They have to be engaged. They have to be involved. You know, me, I'm no longer in politics. I'm now a lawyer. And in a liberal democracy like the United States, the law can actually be a very powerful tool for righting wrongs and for helping people who need a voice. It can. And after my public mistakes, I intend to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that, standing up for those people every way I know how, giving them a voice the best way I know how. And that's something I think I can do. That's what our law firm's for, it's what I'm for. But I want to call on you. You. I mean, the bright, the talented, the privileged, people who can actually do something. I mean, this is your world. I'm 60 years old. You know, hopefully I'm going to last a little longer. But they need you. They need you desperately. You can help change the way this works. You can. Because I hate to say it, you know as well as I do, politicians largely do what public opinion tells them to do. Right? And this is the world we live in. That's politics. Well, I'm asking you to go out and help make that public opinion what it ought to be. To not allow people to live in the shadows. To not allow them to be forgotten. It's your world. You have that power. Use it. Thank you. Thank you all very much.